Hello world. It's Wednesday, March the 6th, 2019. Present time, 11:17 p.m. And today for me was a bit of an odd day. I felt quite under the weather, and as a consequence, I decided to, my day actually started with my being woken up by my alarm at 8 o'clock. I did a quick check. How am I feeling? I decided I'm going to stay in. So I stayed in bed, sleeping until around 11 o'clock, at which point I had lunch, attended my classes, rested some more in the afternoon, and then had dinner. Stayed there for a long time. The good news is I did manage to spend some time on new business. There's been this new can of worms that I've been looking into. I made 2 orders today. One was for a pod system, something like this, but hopefully a whole lot less shitty. A whole lot better. Let's be real. I also looked a bit into pants today. We'll talk about that some other time. But suffice it to say, there's some research ahead of me. I'm looking forward to getting some new pants. An interesting thing happened today. I met, I think, one new person today. While at dinner. Two new people. I should make some notes before I go to sleep on who they were and where they're from and all that. But as I was leaving the dining hall today, I looked and I saw this group of girls coming down the stairs. And they were dressed in these black colored jackets. And the jackets had this little emblem on them. And I was curious what this emblem was. So I kind of hung around by a trash can across a ways. Give them some space. And let them come down the stairs. The backs of the jackets up top, the word Missouri in tall lettering. Then you have this big patch, FFA, at the bottom, Paris. And the new friend I met at dinner, who says that people here call him Bobby, he said, oh, that's Future Farmers Association. And he shared a little anecdote about Paris. But as these girls were walking, I think there were 3 up front and 2 in the back. One of the ones in the back stops, bends down, and she takes off the high heels that she's been wearing. She holds on to them and starts running in just her tights. And the one that was next to her also starts running too, trying to catch up with the group ahead. They're just, they're barely ahead. And as I'm watching, she loses her balance because she's unused to walking on the high heels. And she trips and rolls to a stop. And the other girls, oh, are you okay? Are you okay? She's got a nice tear in her tights. Pick her up. And they move on together. I thought it was kind of humorous at the time. It was more humorous because some of the people I was with, one of them was like, hey, slow down for a minute, slow down. Hey, back. And he hinted that, well, these are high school girls, and if you get too close, then, if you so much as sneeze next to them, you could get in some trouble. That's kind of crazy. I'm just walking. Okay. So that aside, it's been a pretty relaxed evening. I'd like to sleep soon, so I'm going to dive into this. Once more, just for good measure. Garrard. Okay. So, let's get ready here. I think this is here. I realize that's something I should be looking out for. Is actually monitoring this shit to make sure it's not just constant garbage. I say this because I was monitoring it just earlier and it looked kind of choppy at times. I don't know why it was choppy. There's really no good reason for it to be choppy. Hey, Hack God 500 and Kussah. Hello. Stay a while and listen. Boy Erased by Garrard Conley. Boy Erased from 2016 explores the author's experiences within the ex-gay movement, a community that seeks to cure homosexuality. Detailing the cruel methodology of conversion therapy and examining the author's relationship with his devout parents, the book investigates the impact of fundamentalist Christian ideology on LGBT people and their families. Who should read this? Anyone interested in challenging true life stories, those looking for an insight into Christian fundamentalism, and people interested in learning more about bigotry toward the LGBT community. Who wrote the book? Conley is a survivor of conversion therapy and a speaker and activist campaigning to end the practice. Boy Erased was a New York Times bestseller. What's in it for me? Discover what it's like growing up gay in a fundamentalist home. When growing up, most of us are lucky enough to enjoy the unconditional love of our parents. But what would happen if the regard for you suddenly became dependent on you changing a crucial aspect of your identity? That's the question Garrard Conley found himself facing as a gay teenager, growing up in a fundamentalist Christian household. Join us as we accompany Conley on a grueling journey through fear, rejection, and confusion as he navigates the murky world of the ex-gay movement, a religious movement rooted in the belief that homosexuality is a curable sin. Learn what happened to Conley when he agreed to spend 2 weeks in an ex-gay facility that promised to cure him and fellow young gay men and women of their addictions to homosexuality. We'll examine the damaging attitudes, shocking practices, and heartbreaking consequences of gay conversion therapy, and explore what it really means to grow up gay in a small town in the southern United States. Read on to discover the methods the ex-gay movement uses to try to convert gay people, what fundamentalist Christians believe are the causes of homosexuality, and why so many young gay people feel they have no choice but to change themselves. the ex-gay movement taught that homosexuality was a sinful yet curable addiction, just like alcoholism. For many of us, young adulthood is a time of freedom and experimentation, but it's not like that for everyone. In fact, at the tender age of just 19, the author Gerard Connolly was engaging in the very opposite of self-discovery. Instead, he was learning how to erase an important part of his identity. This erasure began in 2004, when he attended an intensive 2-week program that promised to cure him of his addiction. The program providers were a fundamentalist Christian organization called Love in Action. The addiction the program would treat was Connolly's sexuality, his attraction to other men. Love in Action was part of a wider umbrella organization known as Exodus International. With an international reach and operating in countries as far-flung as Brazil, Australia, the Netherlands, and the Philippines, Exodus International was the world's largest ex-gay organization. The ex-gay movement's mission was to propagate the idea that homosexuality was an unnatural perversion created by the devil. The movement believed that people could be cured of their sexual orientation and made straight, just as God intended, by participating in intensive programs such as the one Connolly attended. The Love in Action course consisted of a 12-step program for participants to follow on their journey to recovery. These 12 steps revolved around the principle that homosexuality was a sin akin to pedophilia and bestiality. For instance, when Connolly browsed Love in Action's website before joining up, he was shocked to read that homosexuals were individuals with no self-control, whose proclivities would eventually lead them to have sex with animals if they did not cure themselves. Moreover, Love in Action equated homosexuality to damaging addictions such as gambling and alcoholism. In other words, the program presented itself as a sort of Alcoholics Anonymous for individuals who wanted a way out of their homosexuality. When Connolly first arrived at the program center, he was told that he was using the sin of homosexuality to fill a void in his life, just as other people use drugs and alcohol to curb feelings of emptiness. What he needed to do, the program leader told him, was to renounce homosexuality and fill the void with God instead. Though his time in the ex-gay movement was relatively brief, Connolly's experiences with Love in Action would haunt him for the next decade. Participants in the program were stripped of anything that might compromise traditional gender norms. What helps us form our identity? Is it our clothes, the books we read, or the people with whom we choose to be friends? At the Love in Action Program Center, Connolly was forced to confront this question from the get-go, when everything that might be associated with his existing identity, such as clothing, jewelry, and books, was examined and even confiscated upon his arrival. Participants in the program were told that part of the process of recovering from homosexuality was to encourage their true heterosexual gender identities to reveal themselves. Anything that might hinder the emergence of these new identities was referred to as a false image and confiscated. Hindrances constituting a false image might include sexy clothing, such as tank tops in the case of men, or short skirts in the case of women, wearing an excessive amount of jewelry for men, or talking in a way that was perceived as campy for men. To reinforce traditional ideas of femininity, female participants were required to shave their legs and armpits at least twice a week. Furthermore, program facilitators quickly decided that Connolly's notebook of short stories he'd written constituted a false image that might distract him from his true gender identity. Why? probably because Conley had written one of his stories from the perspective of a female narrator. Additionally, he suspected that some of his descriptions of nature were interpreted by the program administrators as florid, feminine, and an indicator of moral weakness. In the world of love in action, real men didn't concern themselves with such things. Consequently, one of his stories was torn out, and the notebook was confiscated. Significantly, personal effects were not the only contraband items at the program center. For the love in action fundamentalist Christians, sinful influence was everywhere in modern society. The center forbade classical music, claiming that composers such as Bach and Beethoven were unchristian. The program also forbade any references to yoga, astrology, and the fantasy game Dungeons and Dragons, believing them all to be sinful. In fact, before he began the program, Conley was instructed to cast everything aside except for his Bible and the Love in Action Handbook. Yes. The program dictated that there could be no physical contact or hugging between program participants, and allowed for quick handshakes only. The Love in Action participants felt they had no choice but to seek treatment for their sexuality. For many of us, the decision to enter a treatment center that promises to erase part of our identity might seem beyond understanding. But the vast majority of the Love in Action program participants felt they had no choice. Significantly, Conley, as well as most of the people with him, came from what's called the Bible Belt, an area roughly corresponding to the American South, where church attendance is high and religion plays a large role in society. Prejudice against gay people is more typically intense in the Bible Belt than elsewhere in the United States, and most of the program participants had similar stories of discrimination. Nearly all the participants had been given ultimatums by their parents, along the lines that they could either renounce their homosexuality or be cut off from their families forever. Most people in the center had decided to seek treatment after being threatened with homelessness, excommunication from their church, poverty or exile from their deeply religious Southern communities. Sadly, the Love in Action program participants had also internalized much of the homophobia with which they had been confronted. They believed what they had been told, that homosexuals were addicted to sex and drugs, and that a gay lifestyle would inevitably lead to dying of AIDS. Depressingly, these homophobic warnings weren't just issued to them by their families. Fuck, man. Depressingly, these homophobic warnings weren't just issued to them by their families, but also by the media. When Conley was growing up, for instance, it was rare for a movie shown in a small-town cinema to portray gay people as anything other than AIDS victims. To cure themselves of what they believed to be an affliction, many of the program participants ended up staying at the center for many months, if not years. Many younger participants even ended up leaving university to make more time for treatment and to keep a distance from dangerous liberal influences. Additionally, many of the center's staff were former participants who found it safer to stay in the facility than to re-enter society. To be allowed to work at the center, former participants had to agree to talk only to people in the outside world whose status and character had been cleared by the program facilitators. Additionally, They had to agree not to visit any secular environments during their free time, non-Christian bookshops or shopping malls. Some teenage program participants were kept at the center against their wishes, sent by their parents and unable to leave because they were minors. The Love in Action program exacerbated earlier trauma and sometimes led to suicide. As vulnerable minorities living in hostile, prejudiced communities, many of the Love in Action participants had already had traumatic experiences before they joined the program. For many of them, the program merely made this trauma worse. More tragically still, the program leaders ended up pushing some of these vulnerable individuals to a breaking point. Prior to signing up to Love in Action, Connolly himself had experienced severe trauma. Like many in the ex-gay movement, Connolly came from a fundamentalist Christian background, and his father was an evangelical Baptist preacher. Perhaps unsurprisingly, throughout his teenage years, his parents had no idea about his sexuality. During his first year of college, though, Connolly was raped by another student, someone whom he had thought was his friend. In a further act of malice, his rapist then contacted Connolly's parents and told them their son was gay. Thus, at just 19 years old, Connolly found himself dealing with the twin traumas of being raped and being outed to his family. After being telephoned by his rapist, who did not mention that he had raped their son, Connolly's mother immediately pulled him out of college and drove him home. Connolly still remembers her vomiting from shock once they were back home. His father then gave him an ultimatum. If he wanted to carry on studying, he would have to cure his homosexuality. If he refused, then they would no longer pay for his education, and he would have to drop out of college. Under intense pressure, Connolly chose Love in Action. As he would discover, however, the Love in Action Treatment Center was not a safe place for vulnerable individuals to process their traumatic past lives. It's pretty fucked. Oh my gosh. Dude, I think I'm gonna read this and just go crash. Maybe I'll spend a little bit of time hanging out afterwards, but the program's leader, John Smid, had once advised a vulnerable participant that it would be preferable for him to commit suicide rather than live life as a gay man. Moreover, it has been estimated that as many as 30 former participants of the Love in Action program have committed suicide after their treatment. In the 1990s, a former participant alleged that Smid had held a mock funeral at the center for another participant who was considering quitting the program and living as an openly gay man. During this session, Smid made the young man lie down while other participants read out mock obituaries over him. The subject of the proceedings was traumatized by the incident for years afterward. Love in Action counselors believed homosexuality was caused by a lack of childhood sports as well as Satan's influence. There is no definitive answer to the question of why some of us are gay and others are straight. Unsurprisingly, though, the Love in Action program thought they had one. According to their dangerous philosophy, the cause of homosexuality lay in individuals' childhoods and the devil's hold over them. As a Love in Action participant, Connolly was given group counseling by a former alcoholic called Danny Cosby. What counseling qualifications did Cosby have? Absolutely none. Nonetheless, Love in Action felt that Cosby's alcoholism and previous attendance of AA meetings qualified him to cure any addictions, including homosexuality. During his counseling sessions on the subject of masculinity, Cosby told the program participants that they had grown up to be gay because they hadn't played enough sports as children. In Cosby's view, childhood sports provided an opportunity for healthy physical male bonding at a young age, and a lack of sports thus led to unhealthy male bonding at a later stage, which manifested as gay feelings. Importantly, Cosby also saw no difference between homosexuality and heroin addiction. If one could be treated, he thought, so could the other. The Love in Action program also focused on what it saw as Satan's influence on the participants, causing their homosexuality. Only by fully admitting to the devil's influence and reflecting on their sinfulness, they were told, could the participants get back to living a godly life. Consequently, Connolly and his fellow participants were instructed to undertake what the program called a moral inventory each night. In this exercise, Connolly had to take a close look at his sinfulness, instances when he'd been tempted by Satan. Every evening, he had to find a new example of sinful behavior from his past life, typically a moment of sexual impropriety. A detailed description of it, and share it with everyone in group therapy the next day. The group would then provide feedback and help the sharer understand how shameful their past behavior was, how much they had been manipulated by Satan, and how they could refashion themselves to live a more virtuous life. The ex-gay movement has now been discredited and disbanded, but its effects still haunt former members. Against his parents' wishes, Connolly decided not to continue with the Love in Action program. After 2 weeks of trying to erase his true self, he reached the brink of his sanity and knew that any longer at the center might drive him to commit suicide. These days, Love in Action and the larger ex-gay organization to which it belongs, Exodus International, have been disbanded. Unfortunately, the mental scars from Connolly's time in the ex-gay movement still remain with him. Years after Connolly's terrible experience with Love in Action, the program's leader, John Smid, eventually renounced the ex-gay movement himself and admitted what most had known all along, that the program could not change participants' sexual orientation. In other words, there is no way that someone can be made straight. Interestingly, Smid publicly apologized for his actions during his time with the ex-gay movement. In recent years, many other ex-gay therapists and counselors did too. As of 2016, there were very few ex-gay treatment facilities, though some American evangelical Christians are beginning to export ex-gay ideology to countries such as Uganda. Importantly, the ex-gay movement may no longer be a force in southern U.S. life, but the author and many other survivors of the movement still live with its after effects. After walking out of the treatment center, Connolly found it nearly impossible to form lasting, intimate relationships or trust anyone throughout the next decade of his life. Following the program, his faith in God collapsed. Why? Because, thanks to the fundamentalist ideology preached by Love in Action, he now finds it impossible to believe in a God without also believing in his sinfulness. A decade after treatment, God's voice is simply no longer there. Sadly, although his mother has apologized for her part in his treatment, Connolly's relationship with his father remains cold and largely consists of one-sentence emails to one another. Additionally, thanks to the X-Gay movement and his parents' insistence that he join it, Connolly believes that his relationship with his family will recover. Sometimes I just want to die when I think about how difficult it is to get through a day trying to act normal. Former member of the X-Gay movement. Final summary. The key message in this book. Connolly and many others have been haunted by their experiences within the X-Gay movement. By stripping participants of any traces of their identity and turning all their religious beliefs against them, the X-Gay movement made their LGBT participants confused, fearful, and guilty for many years after their therapy. What to read next? Hunger by Roxane Gay. Now that you've followed Gerard Connolly's journey through prejudice, it's time to take a look at Roxane Gay's memoir of discrimination, Hunger. Just as Connolly's sexuality was frowned upon by his community, Gay details her experiences of rejection from wider American society on the basis of her body and her sexual orientation, providing another urgent reminder that America remains a place where queer people have to fight for their lives. Roxane Gay tells us what it's really like to be a queer, fat black woman in the United States today. So to broaden your perspective on body image issues and LGBT rights, check out the book, Hunger. Oh, good Lord. Okay, so I feel like I'm really messed up. I think yesterday was worse. Yeah, I want to say yesterday was worse. Things are improving. Hopefully by the morning I'll feel fine. At least fine enough to show up to work. And we'll see how I feel for the rest of the day. I may leave early if this rears its head. On top of this, I have a couple of assignments I need to knock out. This first 8 weeks is almost over. And after that, I'm finished with school. Well, once I get caught up with all of the little things. Hopefully they'll let me take my time and get caught up with all this crap. Anyways, there was some stuff that I wanted to take a look at, but I don't know that I will do that right now. I don't feel up to it. So instead, I'll save it for next time. Hopefully things will be better soon. Yeah. Cool. Good chat. I think world. Let me take a look at where we are. Oh, flip. I don't know. Bum 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 ba da ba bum. Create a new customer account. I'm laughing to myself a little because I'm thinking about this one thing that happened today that I didn't even mention. Wow. And you know what? It may be completely insignificant. In the grand scheme of things, maybe it's nothing. Just another cosmic nothingness. But who knows? I could be wrong. I could be wrong. What year is it? 2016? Okay, cool. No, it's not 2016 this year. Whoops. Already closed it. So, the thing that happened today, just to bring you up to speed, during my class on the management of financial institutions, we had a guest speaker, Greg Block, former treasurer at Sprint. Apparently, Sprint and T-Mobile are still in acquisition talks. Greg's now been retired for 4 or 5 years. That's all. Okay, thank you, world. Thanks for tuning in, hanging out. But I've got to go get some rest because I'm not feeling 100%, and I want to feel better. Till next time. Till next time. Take care. Bye-bye.